It started on a Wednesday night around 3:40 a.m. I remember because my phone lit up on the nightstand and the clock glowed an ugly green in the dark. I'd just come home from a late shift at the gas station, exhausted but wired. The streets were dead silent, except for the occasional passing truck that rattled the windows. I had barely drifted into that half-sleep where your mind is still awake when I heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching sound coming from somewhere above my room. At first, I thought it was just branches rubbing against the roof. The wind sometimes pushed the old oak tree near my house, and the limbs could scrape the shingles. But then it happened again, this time longer, sharper. Scratch, pause, scratch. It was rhythmic, almost like someone dragging a nail slowly across wood. I turned on my bedside lamp and listened harder. The sound stopped. My heartbeat was loud enough to drown out the silence. I got out of bed, went to the window, and looked up at the roofline through the blinds. Nothing. The streetlight outside threw pale orange light across the yard, and everything looked normal. I was about to convince myself it was just an animal when I heard something that made my stomach drop, a soft thump, like a footstep above my ceiling. That wasn't a branch. That was a person. The sound didn't stop after that first thump. It moved, slow, deliberate, like someone testing each step of the roof before putting their full weight down. The boards creaked softly, one after another. I froze in the middle of my room, every instinct telling me not to make a sound. I lived alone in a one-story house at the edge of town, surrounded by empty lots and a stretch of woods behind the property. Nobody would have been up there, no reason for it. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and opened the flashlight, aiming it toward the ceiling even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. My heart was pounding so hard it made my hand shake. Then I remembered my bedroom window faced the side of the roof. If I was quiet, I could peek out and maybe catch whoever, or whatever, was up there. I pulled the blinds down just an inch and tilted my head toward the glass. For a few seconds, I saw nothing but the faint reflection of my own face in the dark. Then something moved, just the edge of a shoe stepping into view on the shingles. A bare foot. It was filthy, pale, and smeared with something dark. My chest tightened. I held my breath, waiting to see more, but the foot shifted back, out of sight. Then came the worst sound I've ever heard, a low, wet breathing right above the window, followed by the faintest tap-tap-tap on the glass. Like fingertips. I stumbled backward and killed the light on my phone. The tapping stopped. That's when I heard a whisper through the window. My name. When I heard my name whispered through the glass, every muscle in my body locked. It wasn't loud, barely audible, but I know what I heard. Eli, it was drawn out, like whoever said it was smiling while they spoke. I didn't move for a good 30 seconds. My brain was scrambling for logic. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone was messing with me. But that didn't make sense. Nobody even knew where I lived, not really. I'd moved here less than 3 months ago and kept to myself. I slowly crouched below the window, trying not to make the floorboards creak. My phone was still in my hand, but I didn't want to turn on the screen light again. I opened the camera app and switched to the front camera to use it like a mirror, holding it just high enough so the lens pointed toward the window. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then something leaned into view, upside down. A face. Pale, wide-eyed, hair hanging straight down toward the glass. The man was lying flat on the roof, his head hanging over the edge so he could look into my window, his face only inches from the glass. His eyes darted side to side, scanning the room. Then they stopped, directly on the faint light from my phone screen. He grinned. I dropped the phone and scrambled backward, hitting the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame down. The noise must have startled him, because I heard the roof creak again, quick, heavy movements heading toward the back of the house. I ran for the front door to lock it. But when I reached it, it was already locked. Deadbolt in place. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were muddy footprints leading from the door into the house. For a second, I just stared at the footprints. My mind refused to process what I was looking at. They were faint, but clear, the same dirty, bare footprints I'd seen on the roof, now stamped across my hardwood floor. Each print glistened slightly, as if still damp from the night air. I followed them with my eyes. They started at the front door, curved through the small entryway, and disappeared around the corner toward the kitchen. I hadn't heard anyone come in. No door, no window, no sound except the creaking roof just minutes ago. My stomach twisted. Whoever had been on my roof was already inside before I'd even noticed. I backed slowly toward the living room, trying not to make noise. My mind was racing through options: call the cops, run outside, grab something to defend myself. But my phone was still lying on the bedroom floor where I dropped it, and my car keys were on the kitchen counter, the same direction the footprints led. I crouched behind the couch, listening. The house was silent except for the ticking wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then, out of nowhere, came the creak of a floorboard from the hallway, one of the old wooden ones that only make noise when someone steps on them. It was slow, careful, like whoever it was didn't want to be heard but couldn't help it. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so loud I swore it would give me away. I crouched lower, gripping the leg of the coffee table with sweaty hands. Another creak. Closer this time. Then a shadow moved across the far wall, long, distorted, unmistakably human. He was standing in the hallway, watching. The shadow in the hallway didn't move at first. I stayed crouched behind the couch, every muscle tensed, barely breathing. My eyes tried to adjust to the dim light from the street lamp outside, filtering through the blinds. And then I saw him. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was pale, gaunt, and dirt-smudged. Sunken eyes stared back at me like he had been living in the shadows for weeks. His hair hung in greasy clumps, and his clothes were torn and soaked, probably from climbing the roof and trudging through the yard. The air smelled faintly of mud and something metallic, blood? I couldn't tell, but the stench made my stomach churn. His head tilted slightly, scanning the room, and for a moment, our eyes met. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw something, but I was frozen. Then he moved. Slow, deliberate steps, careful not to make too much noise, but each one creaked just enough for me to track him. He didn't say a word, didn't make a sound, just kept walking along the hallway like he was checking every corner. My mind screamed at me, he knows you're here, he knows you're alone. I realized I had to act. Slowly, I reached under the couch for the baseball, but I kept there just in case. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it on the floor with a loud clunk. He froze. His head snapped toward me. For the first time, he made a noise, a low chuckle, almost amused, like he was enjoying the fear he'd created. My heart skipped, my throat went dry. I gripped the bat again, tighter this time, ready for the inevitable. But he didn't advance. Instead, he just disappeared into the shadows of the next room. And that's when I realized something worse than fear itself. He knew the layout of my house. I didn't have a second to think. The intruder knew my house, had clearly scoped it before, and now he was somewhere in the shadows between rooms. My palms were sweaty, my heartbeat pounding like a drum in my ears. I gripped the bat tighter, telling myself I needed a plan, any plan, before he came back into view. I backed toward the kitchen, trying to stay out of the hallway. My mind raced. The front door was behind me, but I had no way to reach it without risking crossing his path. The back door led to the yard, but it was a good 30 feet away, and the sliding glass door was locked with a heavy deadbolt I'd installed months ago. I needed a distraction. I glanced around and spotted the toaster on the counter. It was metal, heavy enough to make a loud noise. If I could throw it toward the hallway, maybe it would startle him long enough for me to slip past. My hand shook as I lifted it. I hurled it toward the hall. It crashed with a deafening clatter, and I heard a sharp intake of breath, human, no doubt, followed by the rapid shuffle of footsteps retreating into the shadows. My stomach dropped. I had no idea where he went, but I knew he wasn't gone. I bolted to the back of the kitchen and unlocked the sliding glass door. Just as I pushed it open, I caught a glimpse of him through the living room window, crouched low, his eyes tracking me like a predator. He didn't move toward me, not yet, but I could see him smile. I didn't stop. I threw the door open and ran out into the backyard, barefoot, the cold grass shocking my senses. My pulse was a thunderstorm in my chest, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. The woods behind my yard were dense, but they were my only chance. As I sprinted toward the tree line, I dared a glance over my shoulder. He was still standing at the edge of the porch, watching, perfectly still, as if deciding whether to follow. Then, without warning, he vanished into the darkness. I didn't have a second to think. The intruder knew my house, had clearly scoped it before, and now he was somewhere in the shadows between rooms. My palms were sweaty, my heartbeat pounding like a drum in my ears. I gripped the bat tighter, telling myself I needed a plan, any plan, before he came back into view. I backed toward the kitchen, trying to stay out of the hallway. My mind raced. The front door was behind me, but I had no way to reach it without risking crossing his path. The back door led to the yard, but it was a good 30 feet away, and the sliding glass door was locked with a heavy deadbolt I'd installed months ago. I needed a distraction. I glanced around and spotted the toaster on the counter. It was metal, heavy enough to make a loud noise. If I could throw it toward the hallway, maybe it would startle him long enough for me to slip past. My hand shook as I lifted it. I hurled it toward the hall. It crashed with a deafening clatter, and I heard a sharp intake of breath, human, no doubt, followed by the rapid shuffle of footsteps retreating into the shadows. My stomach dropped. I had no idea where he went, but I knew he wasn't gone. I bolted to the back of the kitchen and unlocked the sliding glass door. Just as I pushed it open, I caught a glimpse of him through the living room window, crouched low, his eyes tracking me like a predator. He didn't move toward me, not yet, but I could see him smile. I didn't stop. I threw the door open and ran out into the backyard, barefoot, the cold grass shocking my senses. My pulse was a thunderstorm in my chest, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. The woods behind my yard were dense, but they were my only chance. As I sprinted toward the tree line, I dared a glance over my shoulder. He was still standing at the edge of the porch, watching, perfectly still, as if deciding whether to follow. Then, without warning, he vanished into the darkness. The next morning, I was running on maybe an hour of sleep. My friend's couch felt safer than my house, but every little noise kept me awake, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the building, even passing cars. My mind replayed every detail of last night in slow motion. The breathing, the whisper, the way he said my name. The police had checked my property twice before dawn and found nothing unusual. They told me it might have been a homeless man looking for shelter or someone on drugs who picked the wrong house. They didn't seem to believe my story about the whispering or the footprints leading from inside the door. I didn't push it, I knew how it sounded. Around noon, I decided I had to face it. I couldn't live in fear forever. My friend offered to come with me, but I said no. I needed to see the house in daylight, to prove to myself it was over. The drive back was quiet, the empty streets looking harmless in the sun. When I pulled into my driveway, everything looked normal, too normal. The front door was shut, the windows unbroken, and my yard looked untouched. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just small details. A chair pulled slightly away from the table. The blinds in the living room drawn halfway instead of closed like I'd left them. And the air stale, heavy, as if someone had been sitting in there for hours, waiting. I walked room to room, checking closets, under the bed, behind doors. Nothing. My phone was still where I dropped it. The toaster was dented but fine. I started to think maybe the cops were right, maybe I'd panicked. But then I noticed something on the kitchen counter that froze me in place. A folded piece of paper. My name written on it in shaky handwriting. I froze, staring at the folded piece of paper. My hand shook as I picked it up, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The handwriting was uneven, almost childlike, but there was an intentionality to it, a meticulousness that made my stomach twist. I hesitated, knowing instinctively that opening it would change everything. Finally, with a deep breath, I unfolded the paper. One short line was written in dark, smudged ink. "I see you." That was it. Just 3 words. Simple, terrifying. My mind went blank for a moment. The paper trembled in my hands as I tried to process what it meant. Not a threat, not a demand, just a reminder. Someone had been inside my house, had watched me, and now wanted me to know they could do it again at any time. I backed up slowly, scanning the room. Every corner, every shadow seemed to have its own life now. I couldn't tell what was real and what was paranoia. My apartment that had felt like home just a few days ago now seemed like a trap, walls closing in, hiding eyes I couldn't see. I called the police immediately. My voice was barely above a whisper, shaking with fear. They said they would send officers to patrol the neighborhood more frequently, but they also reminded me there was no evidence of forced entry beyond what had happened before. Essentially, they were powerless to stop what I feared most, someone who knew my routines, my home, my habits. I spent the rest of the day on edge, glancing at every window, checking every door, double-locking the sliding glass door, and even installing makeshift barricades with furniture. Every sound, the mailman, a car door, a bird flapping, set off alarms in my head. Sleep that night was impossible. I stayed awake in the living room, bat in hand, lights on, listening for every footstep. By dawn, I realized the intruder hadn't come back yet, but the note proved he could. The thought gnawed at me. The next few nights blurred together into a waking nightmare. I barely slept, surviving on caffeine and paranoia. Every creak in the walls, every shift in the wind made me jump. My rational mind kept trying to explain it: old wood, air vents, the house settling. But deep down, I knew better. Someone had been here. Someone wanted me to feel unsafe. It started with little things. I'd lock the front door at night and wake up to find it unlatched in the morning. I thought maybe I'd just been careless until it happened 3 nights in a row. Then I began noticing items moved, my keys on the counter instead of the hook, the remote turned slightly, a chair angled just differently enough to catch my attention. Subtle things, things easy to doubt. I set up a small camera app on my phone, angled toward the living room. I figured if anything moved while I slept, I'd see it. That first night, nothing. The second, nothing. But on the third night, around 3:17 a.m., I woke up to the faintest sound, a click, like the back door handle being tested. I grabbed the bat and my phone, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and crept toward the noise. Nothing. The door was still locked. The backyard was empty under the pale light. I checked the recording from my phone, expecting static or maybe a trick of light. But there it was, movement. Just barely visible near the edge of the frame. A figure. They didn't walk into view fully, only a shoulder, a sliver of a head. They lingered for less than 5 seconds before fading back into darkness. I rewound it again and again, hoping it was just my imagination. But it wasn't. Someone had been inside the frame of my camera, right at the limit of what I could see. I called the police again, but they couldn't do much without a clear image or proof of forced entry. They suggested I stay with friends for a few days. I hung up without answering. My pride, or maybe my fear of being seen as paranoid, kept me home. I barely slept that night. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the faint rattle of a branch against the window. I lay in bed with my phone camera recording toward the door, the screen dimmed, hoping it would catch anything I might miss. Sometime around 2:40 a.m., I must have drifted off. When I woke up, my phone was on the floor, a still recording. The battery was nearly dead. I didn't remember dropping it. I sat up, trying to steady my breathing, and scrolled through the footage. Most of it was static, hours of nothing but silence and shadows. But then, at 3:12 a.m., I saw movement. The door opened. Slowly. Silently. A figure stepped halfway inside. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching. His outline was faint but unmistakably human, tall, thin, head tilted slightly like he was listening. For 30 agonizing seconds, he didn't move. Then, almost casually, he took one step forward. The camera caught his arm reaching toward the bed, toward me. Then the screen went dark. I dropped the phone, my breath catching in my throat. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my neck, everywhere. The idea that someone had been standing right next to me while I slept made my skin crawl. I called the police again, my words tripping over themselves. This time, I sent them the video. They promised to send a unit immediately. When the officers arrived, they checked every door, every window, every inch of the house. Nothing. No fingerprints. No footprints. No forced entry. The detective who watched the footage said it was too dark to identify anything clearly. After they left, I sat on my bed, staring at the door. I should have packed a bag and left right then, but I didn't. Maybe it was denial, maybe stubbornness, maybe fear of facing what it meant. Because if he could enter without breaking in, then he either had a key, or he was already INS. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Small, subtle clues that made my stomach twist with dread. A book on the kitchen counter moved slightly, though I was sure I'd left it on the shelf. A faint smell, like someone had been cooking, lingered in the air, even though I hadn't touched anything. Most chilling of all, my bedroom window lock had been fiddled with again, as if someone had tried to test it while I slept. I couldn't deny it any longer. Someone was inside my house without me knowing when, how, or why. Panic and disbelief swirled together. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it away: air drafts, forgetfulness, sleepwalking. But the evidence stacked up. The cameras, the noises, the moved objects. Everything pointed to the terrifying reality that the intruder was sneaking in during the dead of night. That night, I decided to take action. I left a small trail of flour along the hallway floor, something I'd read about once in a true crime documentary. If anyone walked through, it would leave footprints. I also set up my phone in a corner with night vision mode, covering the hallway leading to my bedroom. The plan was simple: catch whoever it was in the act. Hours passed. I lay in bed, heart hammering, listening to every creak, every shift of air. Around 3:17 a.m., I heard it, faint shuffling in the hallway. My stomach dropped. I froze, gripping the bat. Then the door handle rattled. Someone was testing it. My blood ran cold. The flour on the floor was disturbed. Footprints led down the hallway, and the phone camera had captured movement. Tall, thin, careful, deliberate. He was inside again. The realization hit me like a punch. He didn't just come and go. He had been hiding in my house, moving silently while I slept, watching me, learning my patterns. I knew then I was no longer just being watched from the outside. He was already inside. And the worst part? I didn't know where. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat on the floor, staring at the white footprints trailing down my hallway. They stopped near the kitchen, but there were no prints leading back. That meant he hadn't left. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something stronger held me still: anger, maybe. Or the need for answers. Whoever this was, he wasn't going to keep haunting me. Not tonight. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, trembling in my hand. My house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own uneven breathing. I moved slowly, checking corners, opening closets, whispering to myself that I was being stupid. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped. The air was different there, colder, heavier, like someone had just moved through it. The footprints led straight to the pantry door. It was slightly open, just enough to see the darkness inside. I raised the bat and nudged the door with my foot. It creaked open. Empty shelves. No one inside. My heart pounded as I backed up, scanning the floor again. Then I noticed something I hadn't before, a narrow vent at the bottom of the pantry wall, half hidden behind cleaning supplies. It was old, maybe part of a crawl space or access panel. And it had been shifted recently, dust disturbed, screws missing. That's when the sound came. A faint scrape. Metal against metal. From inside the wall. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the bat. The noise came again, slow, deliberate, like someone moving carefully through a tight space. I backed toward the door, pulse hammering, when the flashlight flickered over something near the vent, a fingerprint. Fresh. Oily. Human. That was enough. I bolted outside, slammed the door behind me, and called the police for the 4th time in 2 weeks. This time, they took me seriously. 2 officers arrived, flashlights out, weapons drawn. When the officer unzipped the backpack and the photos spilled out across my kitchen table, I felt the blood drain from my face. They were all of me, sitting on my couch, cooking dinner, brushing my teeth, even sleeping. Every picture was taken from a slightly different angle, as if he'd been testing how close he could get without being noticed. Some photos were old. I could tell by the clothes I was wearing, weeks old. Meaning, he hadn't just found his way in once. He'd been here for a while. The officer, a tired-looking man named Ruiz, asked if I recognized anyone who might have a reason to do this. A co-worker, ex-neighbor, anyone who might hold a grudge. I shook my head. I lived alone, didn't date much, and kept to myself. My life wasn't interesting enough for someone to stalk. At least, that's what I thought. Ruiz took the evidence and said they'd run forensics on the fingerprints, but I could tell from his face that he wasn't hopeful. These cases don't always get solved, he said carefully. But we'll do what we can. That night, I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and went to my friend Noah's place again. I thought maybe I'd finally be able to breathe, but even in his apartment, I kept checking windows and corners. Every sound still set me off. Sleep was impossible. The next morning, I went back to my house with the police to collect more of my things. That's when Ruiz pointed out something I hadn't noticed before. The photos weren't printed from a phone or computer, they were developed. Old style, from a darkroom. Someone had taken time, effort, and care to produce them. This wasn't random. This was personal. One of the photos had something different. On the back, written faintly in pencil, was a single word. Neighbor. I felt my stomach turn cold. After seeing that single word written on the back of the photograph, I couldn't focus on anything else. Neighbor. I whispered to Ruiz, but he just shook his head. We'll have to check addresses, see if any fingerprints match, but don't get ahead of yourself. He didn't understand. I wasn't imagining things. Someone close to my home had been stalking me for weeks. When I returned, I started noticing little details I had ignored before. A shadow moving past my blinds late at night, the sound of someone walking quickly behind my fence when there shouldn't have been anyone. I began observing my neighbors carefully, trying to reconcile this thought with reality. Who among them had the motive, the patience, the audacity? Then I remembered the new neighbor who had moved in a few months ago, a man in his 40s who kept mostly to himself. I had waved once or twice, but he never responded. I thought little of it at the time, but now the pieces felt different. The timeline fit. The photos. The careful observation. Could he have been watching me all along? I started noting every small irregularity. Packages that should have been delivered to his house sometimes ended up near my mailbox. Car doors locking at odd hours. Faint noises that seemed to echo from his side of the street. My gut screamed, and yet part of me wanted to be wrong. I didn't want to think a neighbor, someone I passed casually, could be capable of something so sinister. One night, I stayed awake, hiding behind my living room curtains. Around 2:30 a.m., I noticed movement near the side of my house. A figure crouched low, careful, almost like a cat. My heart raced. My hands shook, but I had to see. The flashlight I kept on the table illuminated just enough to reveal him, the neighbor. He froze when our eyes met through the slats of the blinds, then melted into the shadows, disappearing before I could process it. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just watching. He had been living in my house. After that night, I couldn't pretend anymore. I'd seen him, the neighbor, on my property, moving like he belonged there. But without proof, no one would believe me. The police were already treating me like I was paranoid. So I decided to do what they wouldn't. I'd catch him myself. The next morning, I bought 2 small security cameras online. Motion activated, night vision, easy to hide. I placed one outside near the side fence where I'd seen him crouching, and another inside, aimed at the hallway that connected my kitchen and bedroom, the same hallway where I'd found the footprints in the flour. I didn't tell anyone. The fewer people who knew, the better. For 2 nights, nothing happened. I started to think maybe I'd scared him off. But on the 3rd night, the inside camera triggered at 3:26 a.m. I woke up to the notification, my stomach dropping before I even checked the footage. The video started grainy, showing the empty hallway. Then, from the left side of the frame, a shadow appeared. It wasn't fast, it moved with purpose, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. He stepped into view, wearing dark clothes, his face obscured by a hood. He paused right in front of the camera. For a few seconds, he just stood there, completely still. Then he looked directly into the lens. The movement was deliberate. His head tilted, almost curious, like he wanted me to know he saw it, that he knew I was watching him this time. And then, as quickly as he came, he turned and walked out of frame. My heart pounded as I replayed the footage over and over. The height, the posture, it was him. My neighbor. There was no mistaking it now. I called the police immediately, sending them the clip. They arrived within 20 minutes. Ruiz was among them again, jaw tight as he reviewed the footage. "We'll question him," he said. "Don't go near him." But that warning came too late. The police went to the neighbor's house early the next morning. I stayed in my car down the street, heart hammering, unable to shake the feeling that he knew I was watching. Minutes felt like hours as I watched Ruiz and 2 other officers knock on the door, then enter. The silence that followed was unbearable. I couldn't look away. After what felt like forever, the officers came back out. Ruiz's face was tight, his jaw clenched. "You need to see this," he said, his voice low. Inside the neighbor's house, they found dozens of photographs, all of me. Every angle of my home, my yard, even the interior rooms. Some had been taken months ago, carefully labeled with dates and times. But that wasn't all. They discovered notebooks filled with observations, notes about my habits, when I left for work, when I slept, when I cooked, even when I took showers. It was meticulous, methodical, and terrifying. Someone had been planning this for a long time. Ruiz warned me to remain vigilant. "He knows you now," he said. "Even if he's caught on camera, that doesn't mean he won't try again." My stomach dropped. I realized this wasn't a one-off obsession, it was ongoing, escalating, and deeply personal. The police left me with a sense of safety, but I felt anything but secure. That night, I installed motion sensors and extra locks on every window. Every creak, every rustle of wind, made me jump. Around 2 a.m., a faint light flashed across the side of my house. My heart froze. I ran to the window, nothing. No figure. No shadow. Just the faint glow of something fleeting. I knew he was still out there. And I understood something chilling, the game had only just begun. For a few days after the police raid, my street looked normal again. Kids rode their bikes, sprinklers hissed, porch lights flicked on at dusk. But underneath that calm, I felt something off, like the silence that settles before a storm. I told myself the worst was over. They had the evidence, surely that meant he'd disappear. Then small things started happening again. My mailbox door left hanging open. My trash can dragged halfway up the driveway. My porch light unscrewed just enough to go dark. None of it violent, just precise, little reminders that someone could still reach me whenever they wanted. I called Ruiz twice more, but he said the neighbor denied everything and there wasn't enough to hold him. Without a direct threat, their hands were tied. That sentence replayed in my head every night. Their hands were tied. Mine, too. One evening, as I walked to my car, I noticed an envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, a photo of me sitting at my desk, taken through my living room window the night before. The curtains had been drawn only an inch. Whoever took it had been right outside. I didn't call the police this time. I just sat in my car, gripping the photo until the edges bent, trying to breathe. Fear gave way to something colder, exhaustion. He wanted me terrified, trapped in my own home, always reacting. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction anymore. That night, I stayed awake with all the lights off, a camera pointed at the window where the photo had been taken. Hours passed. The neighborhood slept. And then, sometime after 3, a faint movement, a figure outside, just beyond the glass. He leaned forward, close enough for me to see his breath fog the pain. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just watched as he raised his phone, snapped a picture of me watching him, and then walked away into the dark. I realized then that this wasn't about breaking in anymore. I spent the next day in silence, curtains closed, every light off. My phone sat on the table, untouched. The photo of me through the window still burned in my mind. Fear had turned into something sharper, resolve. If the police couldn't protect me, then I'd protect myself. I started planning. I didn't want confrontation, I wanted proof. The kind no one could ignore. So I went out during daylight, when I knew he wouldn't risk being seen, and bought 2 hidden cameras, one disguised as a smoke detector for inside, another as a motion light for the porch. I installed them quietly, methodically, every screw tightened by shaking hands. Then I did something I'd been too scared to try before. I baited him. I left the curtains open just slightly wider, the living room lamp dimmed, and my phone visible on the counter, recording. I wanted him to think I'd finally let my guard down. For 2 nights, nothing happened. I barely slept, lying awake, staring at the faint glow of the recording light. Then, on the 3rd night, a motion alert buzzed on my phone at 2:54 a.m. I sat up, every muscle tense. The footage from the porch camera loaded, grainy, quiet. The frame showed the front yard bathed in soft light. And then, there he was. The neighbor. He approached slowly, looking around, wearing the same dark hoodie. He moved toward the window, just like before, but this time he lingered longer, scanning the house. Then he looked straight up, at the camera disguised as a light. For the first time, his expression changed. A faint smile. Like he knew. He backed away, turned, and walked off down the street, calm, unhurried. He hadn't been caught by surprise. He wanted me to see him again, to remind me that even my precautions meant nothing. By morning, I sent the footage to Ruiz. He promised they'd escalate it to a detective, maybe get a warrant this time. But as I sat in my living room, daylight spilling across the floor, a realization crept in. The detective called that morning. He said the footage was interesting, but not enough to prove intent. The man hadn't broken in, hadn't threatened me. Just stood outside. "We'll keep an eye on it," he said. Same words. Same useless comfort. I hung up and sat at the table, listening to the refrigerator hum. My house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every sound suspicious. The heater clicked on, then off again. The pipes creaked. A floorboard popped from the hallway. I froze. It was light out, late morning, so I told myself it was just settling wood. But the sound came again, softer this time. A scuff, like a sock dragging across tile. My stomach twisted. I grabbed a kitchen knife and moved slowly toward the hallway. The air back there felt heavier. The kind of heavy that makes your skin prickle before your brain catches up. I reached the bedroom door and pushed it open with my foot. Nothing. The window was cracked an inch open. The curtain swayed slightly. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding so loud I could barely hear. Then I noticed it, faint boot prints on the hardwood, leading from the window toward the closet. I wanted to scream, but instinct locked my throat. My hand tightened on the knife. I edged closer, one step at a time. The door was slightly ajar. I nudged it open. Inside, empty clothes hangers. A few shirts. Darkness. Nothing. Then, from behind me, a floorboard creaked. I spun around, no one there. But on the nightstand, sitting where it hadn't been minutes ago, was my phone. The same phone I'd left recording in the living room. The screen was on. A video was playing, live footage from my porch camera. Except this time, the feed wasn't showing outside. It was showing me. From somewhere inside the house. And in the far corner of the frame, just barely visible in the reflection of the TV, was a shape, a man standing behind me. I didn't turn. I ran. Straight out the front door, barefoot, across the yard. I didn't go home after that night. The detective said they'd increase patrols, but that meant nothing. I packed a bag and crashed on my coworker Jamie's couch. She didn't ask many questions, just handed me a blanket and said I could stay as long as I needed. I thought distance might help, new address, new locks, new routine. For a few days, it almost worked. I started going back to work, tried to convince myself it was over. Then on Thursday, I came back to Jamie's apartment and saw an envelope slipped under the door. My name written in black marker. No address. No stamp. Just like before. Inside was a photo. Another Polaroid. This time, it wasn't my house. It was the front of Jamie's building, her unit number clearly visible. The timestamp on the corner said 2:03 a.m. I felt my chest tighten. He'd found me again. Jamie tried to calm me down, saying it could have been some sick prank, that maybe I was overreacting. But that night, around 1:30, her dog started barking, low, anxious growls toward the balcony. We both froze. I crept over and peeked through the blinds. Nothing at first. Then a faint glimmer, like a reflection off a camera lens, from the alley across the street. It disappeared a second later. The next morning, my car windshield was cracked, like someone had pressed their hand against it with too much force. Under the wiper, another note. You can run, but I can see you anywhere. I showed the police everything. They took the photos, wrote another report, promised to review building security footage. But I'd already checked it myself. The cameras covering the alley had been turned off the night before. Someone had logged in remotely. That was when I realized this wasn't just obsession anymore. He wasn't watching me, he was inside my digital life, my accounts, my cameras. Every place I thought I could hide, he'd already mapped out. And he was getting closer again. By now I understood one thing, waiting for help was useless. Every time I called the police, the man was a step ahead, careful enough to stay just outside the law. If I wanted this to stop, I needed to know who he really was and how far his reach went. I started by checking the only devices I still trusted, the ones I'd bought new after leaving my house. I disconnected Jamie's Wi-Fi, turned off Bluetooth, and went through every setting line by line. That's when I noticed it, a guest account listed under my laptop's remote access history. The connection had been active for 19 minutes the night before. Whoever it was had been inside my system. I installed tracing software, set up alerts, and waited. For 2 nights, nothing. Then, around 2:40 a.m., The notification appeared, remote user connected. My pulse spiked. I watched as the IP address loaded on screen, traced through 2 VPN layers, then stopped on a local service provider less than 5 kilometers from Jamie's apartment. He was nearby. I copied the data, saved screenshots, and forwarded everything to Ruiz and the detective. It wasn't much, but it was proof of intrusion, enough to request a warrant. When I called to tell them, Ruiz sounded surprised. He said, "You might have just given us the break we need." That night I allowed myself to breathe for the first time in weeks. Jamie poured me a drink, we sat in silence, the city noise soft outside. For a moment it felt like control was shifting back my way. Then, just after midnight, an email came in, no subject, no sender. I opened it without thinking. It was a single image attachment. A screenshot of my laptop screen, taken from the same tracing software I'd installed hours before. Beneath it, 3 words. "Nice try, Eli." Sleep didn't happen that night. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the email until dawn. The words "nice try, Eli" burned into the screen. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just nearby, he was inside everything I touched. When Ruiz called the next morning, he sounded cautious. "We traced the IP you sent," he said. "But the signal bounced through a work network downtown, City Data Systems." My stomach dropped. That was the company where I worked. He told me to stay put while they checked it out, but I was already halfway out the door. If the connection came from my own office, it meant one thing: whoever was watching me wasn't just some faceless stranger. He was someone I saw every day. The elevator ride up felt endless. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint whir of servers, sounds that had always been background noise now felt hostile. I walked past rows of cubicles until I reached mine. Nothing looked disturbed, but the air felt wrong. I checked my workstation's activity logs. The remote connections matched the same timestamp as the one from Jamie's apartment. Access credentials, admin_guest_23, an internal account. Only IT had that level of control. I went straight to Mark, the senior systems engineer. We'd had beers after work a few times. He was quiet, awkward, always wore that same black hoodie. I found him in the server room, bent over a monitor. When he saw me, he smiled, too calm, too knowing. "Couldn't sleep," he said. My mouth went dry. I asked why my home network had been accessed from our system. His eyes flicked to the security camera in the corner, then back to me. "Careful, Eli. You might not like what you find." The tone, low, amused, was the same voice I'd heard whisper through my intercom weeks ago. That's when it hit me. The man on the roof had never been a stranger. He'd been standing right behind me at work all along. I left the server room pretending nothing had changed. My face must have looked normal because Mark just nodded, eyes on the screen, that same faint smile. Every instinct told me to run, but I forced myself to walk, calm, measured steps back to my desk. My mind was racing. He had access to every system in the building, every camera feed, every login. If I confronted him outright, he could erase everything, or worse, follow me home again. I needed proof, hard evidence that couldn't vanish with a keystroke. So I started quietly. I plugged a small encrypted USB into my terminal and began copying the access logs from the internal server, the one showing admin_guest_23 connecting to my home network. It would take a few minutes, and every second felt like an hour. While the progress bar crawled, I opened Slack to message Ruiz. Just one word, "found him." Before I could hit send, a new message appeared on my screen. From an unlisted account. "Nice to see you working late." I looked up. Mark's office door was half closed. Through the glass, I saw him leaning back in his chair, watching me. He raised a finger to his lips, a quiet shook, then turned back to his monitor. The copy finished. I yanked the drive, slipped it into my pocket, grabbed my jacket, and walked out without a word. I didn't even bother clocking out. By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. Every car headlight made me flinch. I half expected to see him following me, but the lot stayed empty except for the hum of sodium lights. I drove straight to the police station, rehearsing what I'd say. But when I arrived, Ruiz wasn't there. The front desk officer checked the system, no note, no shift record, nothing. Ruiz had been off duty for 3 days. That's when I realized the text I'd sent earlier, found him, hadn't gone to his official number. It had gone to the unknown contact who'd been messaging me all along. The air in the police station felt thick, recycled. I sat on the plastic bench staring at the wall, replaying every message, every email, every sound I'd ignored. The officer at the front desk kept glancing my way but said nothing. When I finally asked for Detective Ruiz again, she frowned. Ruiz? There's no one here by that name, she said, scrolling through her screen. I told her he'd been handling my case for weeks, showed her the number, the emails. She looked at the phone and shook her head. That's not one of ours. My throat went dry. Then who have I been talking to? She offered to take a report, but I couldn't stay there. Every word I'd sent, every image, every plea for help, all of it might have gone straight to him. Whoever he really was. I stepped outside, phone clutched in my hand. The night air was damp and cool. Streetlights buzzed softly overhead. I opened the text thread, dozens of messages from Ruiz, each one guiding me, calming me, asking for updates. Each one pushing me to share more. Photos of my setup, my cameras, my hiding places. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been directing me. The last message blinked unread at the bottom of the thread. Check your car. I froze. My car was parked across the street, under the edge of a flickering light. For a long moment I couldn't move. Then, slowly, I walked toward it. The reflection in the window showed only my face, pale and tight. I leaned in closer and saw a small black device magnet clip beneath the rearview mirror. A camera. The same model I'd used at home. I backed away, heart pounding, then noticed something else, tucked beneath the windshield wiper, half hidden under a folded receipt. A Polaroid. It showed me, sitting on that same bench inside the station. He'd been here, tonight. By the time I got back to Jamie's, dawn was already pushing through the clouds. I didn't wake her. I just grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with whatever I could reach, laptop, cash, charger, change of clothes, and left without a sound. I wasn't going to work. I wasn't calling anyone. I was gone. I drove for hours, no destination, no plan. Back roads, gas stations, coffee shops where no one looked twice. Every mirror felt like an accusation. Every car that stayed behind me too long made my chest tighten. I ditched my phone in a trash bin outside a rest stop near the state line and bought a prepaid one from a vending machine. For the first time in months, there was silence. No pings. No alerts. Just wind through the cracked window. I thought maybe this was it, finally, the distance I needed. That illusion lasted less than a day. When I checked into a cheap roadside motel, I paid in cash, used a fake name. The clerk barely glanced up. Room 17, flickering light, peeling wallpaper, but it felt like safety. I slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke, there was a note under the door. No knock, no sound, just the paper waiting on the carpet. Running doesn't fix it. No signature. No marks. The handwriting was blocky and deliberate, just like the notes from before. I stared at it until my hand stopped shaking, then tore it up. He couldn't know where I was. I'd paid cash, left my phone, changed everything. But when I opened my laptop, the same one I'd wiped clean, the screen flashed once and went black. Then a message appeared. Hello again, Eli. The Wi-Fi was off. No cables plugged in. That was when it hit me. It wasn't just about being watched, it was about being known. Every habit, every fear, every decision. He didn't need to find me. He already knew exactly where I'd go. I sat on the motel bed, staring at the words on the screen until the laptop powered itself off. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I started thinking, not panicking, thinking. There had to be a pattern. Nobody could predict me unless I'd been leaving a trail. I unplugged the laptop, pulled out the battery, and cracked the casing open with a hotel keycard. Inside, near the fan vent, was a paper-thin chip taped to the frame. A Bluetooth tracker, tiny, almost invisible. My stomach turned. It hadn't come with the laptop, it had been added later. Maybe weeks ago. Maybe the day I brought it to the office. I flushed it down the toilet and turned to the prepaid phone. It was brand new, sealed when I bought it, but the paranoia was there now. I powered it on and went through the settings. The default wallpaper wasn't the one that came with the model, it was a photo, grainy, low light, of me walking into the motel an hour earlier. He'd swapped the phone before I even got to the store. That realization almost broke me. But fear was starting to feel like fuel. If he knew every step, then he was relying on routine, my predictability. So I changed it. I grabbed my things, left the laptop behind, and walked out through the side exit, not the front. I didn't drive. I walked half a mile to a bus stop, then took 3 random routes until the city lights blurred together. Every transfer, I checked reflections in windows, looking for anyone too still, anyone watching. By midnight, I was at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. Grease-stained counter, humming neon sign. For once, no cameras, no Wi-Fi, just static on a radio and a waitress who didn't care who I was. I borrowed her landline and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, my brother's. Someone I knew I could trust. Or at least, I hoped I could. The line rang twice. Then a click. A man's voice answered, calm and familiar. Took you long enough, Eli. It wasn't my brother's voice. The diner ceiling fan thumped softly above me as that voice bled through the receiver, calm, practiced, too confident to be a guess. Who is this? I asked. He chuckled once. You really should stop using other people's phones. You don't know where they've been. My hand went slick with sweat. I hung up, but the dial tone didn't come back. The line stayed alive, faint breathing on the other end. I dropped the receiver, heart hammering, and stepped outside into the cold air. I walked fast, no destination, just distance. Neon signs reflected off wet asphalt. My thoughts clawed through the same question, how could he keep finding me? Then I remembered something from my work, every network I'd ever connected to, every Wi-Fi login, every saved credential. My laptop, my phone, even Jamie's router, all backed up to the same company cloud. The one Mark managed. The one I'd never logged out of. He didn't need to track my devices, he could track me. The moment I connected anywhere, my profile pinged his system. I ducked into a laundromat, bought a soda just to have a reason to stand there, then borrowed a stranger's tablet under the pretense of checking email. I opened a private browser and went straight to the admin portal for City Data Systems. Still active. My old credentials worked. Inside the security logs, I found something chilling, not just my connections, but hundreds, names, addresses, access points. Dozens of employees. Their cameras, their microphones, their personal devices, all silently mirrored. Mark wasn't targeting only me. I was just the one who'd noticed. I started a data download to the tablet's memory, a failsafe I could take to the real police if I made it that far. Halfway through, a new line of text appeared at the bottom of the portal. Stop digging. The download froze. The laundromat lights flickered once, then steadied. I looked toward the street window. A dark sedan idled at the curb, engine running, headlights off. Someone was inside. The sedan didn't move. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, just another late-night driver waiting for someone, but every few seconds the red glow of a cigarette flared in the darkness of the driver's seat. Watching. Measuring. I grabbed the stranger's tablet and slipped out the back door of the laundromat. The alley smelled like detergent and rain. My shoes splashed through puddles as I cut behind the building, heart pounding. Every step sounded too loud. I didn't look back. When I reached the next street, I ducked into a convenience store, pretending to browse. My reflection in the cooler glass looked pale, hollow. The clerk didn't even glance up. Outside, headlights crawled past the window once, then again, slower this time. The same sedan. I bought a cheap prepaid SIM card I didn't need just to have an excuse to stay inside. My fingers trembled as I counted coins. When I finally stepped out, the car was gone. Only the wet street, the hum of a street lamp, the city breathing in the distance. I started walking again, turning random corners, hoping unpredictability might save me. But the feeling never left, that presence trailing just beyond sight. Every crosswalk reflection, every parked van, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision pulled my stomach tighter. By the time I reached the bus station, dawn was beginning to grey the horizon. A cleaning crew pushed brooms across the tiled floor, the sound echoing in my skull. I sat on a bench, clutching the tablet like it was oxygen. An announcement crackled over the speakers, garbled, distant, then my name. Eli Carter, please proceed to gate 4. Your personal item has been found. I hadn't told anyone my name. The monitor above the gate flickered from the usual timetable to a still image, a grainy live feed of me, sitting on that bench, looking up in confusion. Across the terminal, a man in a black hoodie lowered his phone, smiled faintly, and slipped into the crowd. I bolted from the bus station bench before I even processed the announcement. My feet pounded the pavement, heart thudding so loudly I thought someone would hear it blocks away. Every streetlight cast jagged shadows, each one threatening to hide him. My hands gripped the tablet like a weapon, though I knew it wouldn't stop him. I zigzagged through side streets, ducking into alleys, crouching behind dumpsters, and scanning the crowd for any sign of that black hoodie. My brain screamed at me to call the police again, but something told me, if he wanted me caught, any signal could betray my location. The prepaid SIM might have made me feel safe, but it was just another breadcrumb on his trail. 2 blocks later, I spotted him. Standing on a corner, still hooded, still calm. The way he leaned against the lamppost, hands in pockets, looking like he owned the night, made my stomach turn. He hadn't run. He didn't need to. He knew I'd keep moving. I ducked behind a parked car and tried to catch my breath, trying to plan my next move. But no plan came fast enough. When I peeked out, he was gone from that corner, but the reflection in a nearby window showed him moving parallel to me. Every instinct screamed that he was always 2 steps ahead. I sprinted again, cutting through a construction site, the metal fences scraping my arms, rubble underfoot. My lungs burned. And then, footsteps. Matching mine. Not behind me. Beside me. Faster than a normal man could keep pace, but he did. I tripped over a stray cable, falling hard onto the gravel, scraping my hands and knees. Before I could push up, he was there, a shadow in the dim light, just watching me, calm, silent, almost patient. My mind went blank. I didn't even know whether to scream, fight, or run. And then, from nowhere, a car horn blared. He vanished in the chaos of passing vehicles, leaving only a faint echo of laughter in my ears. I lay there gasping, broken, and realized with chilling clarity. By the time the city lights began to fade behind me, I'd made a decision. Running wasn't working. I needed to flip the script, become the watcher instead of the prey. I found a 24-hour diner near the edge of town, slid into a booth by the window, and ordered black coffee. My hand still shook, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. I opened the stranger's tablet again. The cracked screen glowed faintly, its camera light blinking once before it went dark. It wasn't just any tablet. The files inside were labeled by addresses, dates, and names. Mine was there. every location I'd been over the last week. Screenshots of street camera stills, ATM reflections, even my own apartment entryway. He'd been logging everything. I took photos of the screen with my phone, deleting them immediately from my gallery afterward, just in case. Then I set the tablet face down, camera against the table. If he was watching, I wanted him to see nothing but black. An hour passed. No sign of him. The night crowd thinned, leaving only a few truckers and a waitress humming under the flickering neon light. I almost believed I'd shaken him off. Until the waitress came over, smiling softly, and placed a folded napkin next to my cup. "You left this last time you were here." There was handwriting on the napkin. My handwriting. It said, "I told you not to run." I froze. My chest felt hollow. I hadn't written that. When I looked up, the waitress was already walking away, but her eyes flicked toward the window. A car idled outside in the darkness, engine low, headlights off. The driver's door opened just an inch, enough for a sliver of light to catch the reflection of a face. Calm. Familiar. Waiting. I barely finished my coffee before I left the diner, heart racing and eye scanning every shadow. The napkin still burned in my pocket, proof that he wasn't just following me randomly. He was inside my life, watching, waiting. I needed control, and I needed it tonight. No more running. I made my way back to my apartment with deliberate calm, each step calculated. I didn't take the usual route. I doubled back, cut through a service alley, ducked behind trash bins, and checked every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, even puddles, for movement. Every instinct screamed that he could be anywhere, yet I had to believe I could outsmart him. Inside my apartment, I gathered everything I could use: lamps, extension cords, a heavy metal flashlight, and my phone's recording app. I unplugged the living room lights and set the room to minimal illumination, leaving one desk lamp near the window. It would act as bait, a single, tempting point for anyone watching from outside. Then I went to the kitchen and quietly opened a window facing the street. Not completely, just enough to hear him if he tried anything. I left my phone on the sill, recording sound. Every creak, every step, every shuffle would be captured. This time, I would be ready. Hours passed. The city fell silent, leaving only the occasional distant siren. I almost convinced myself he had finally given up. Then I heard it, a faint scraping, deliberate, soft enough that most people would ignore it. My stomach clenched. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving along the fire escape outside my window. I held my breath. The shadow of a figure flickered across the sheer curtain. My pulse skyrocketed. I gripped the flashlight, ready to confront him. The trap was set. This time, I wouldn't flee. I would see who he was, why he was doing this, and I would end it, one way or another. The figure paused. A single hand brushed against the glass. I flicked the light on, heart hammering, and locked eyes with him. For a second, neither of us moved. The man stood just outside the window, the faint light from the street painting his face in half shadow. He wasn't masked, wasn't wild-eyed or crazed, just calm, almost polite. That made it worse. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to whisper through the glass. My voice cracked, the words trembling. He tilted his head slightly, studying me the way someone might study an insect under glass. Then he spoke, quiet enough that I had to lean closer to hear him. "You left the door unlocked." I froze. My mind went blank. The window, that wasn't how he got in before. It was the door. He'd been inside already. The thought barely had time to form before I heard it, the faintest click from the living room, behind me. The sound of a hinge settling. My stomach dropped. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the dark, but the door was closed, exactly as I'd left it. Still, the air felt different. The kind of heaviness you only feel when someone else is in the room. When I turned back to the window, the man was gone. No sound of footsteps. just empty glass and my own reflection staring back at me, pale and shaking. I backed away slowly, every hair on my neck standing up. I could feel eyes on me, close, too close, but there was nowhere to look that didn't already feel watched. I reached for my phone on the sill to call the police, but the screen was black. Dead. It had been charging moments ago. Something moved behind the couch, a soft, deliberate shift. Not a creak. A step. I raised the flashlight again, hands trembling. The beam caught a face. Not the man's. Mine. Reflected in a small, circular lens. A camera. It had been recording me the whole time. I froze in place, the beam of my flashlight fixed on that tiny black lens wedged between the bookshelf and the wall. A camera, small, almost invisible. My breath hitched. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped closer, grabbed it, and yanked it free from the wall. The wire snake behind the furniture, disappearing into a neat hole that hadn't been there yesterday. My pulse roared in my ears. I followed the cable across the floor, tugging until the other end came loose. It led to a small black box hidden behind the entertainment unit, humming faintly. I flipped it open. Dozens of memory cards inside, each labeled by date. The earliest one was from 3 months ago. I jammed one into the tablet I'd stolen. Folders appeared instantly. Kitchen, hallway, bedroom, window. Each filled with clips. Every second of my life, from every angle. I clicked on one at random and saw myself, sitting right there, on that couch, watching TV like nothing was wrong. Then I noticed the reflection in the TV screen. A shape behind me, standing in the hallway. Watching. My stomach lurched. I ripped the card out and threw it across the room. That's when I realized something worse. There were no new recordings. The most recent file ended from earlier tonight, just before I'd set my trap. He'd already known I'd find them. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. He wanted me to see how deep it went. The air felt electric. The quiet too heavy. Then the TV flickered on by itself. Static filled the room, and through the noise, a voice emerged, distorted, low, familiar. "You're learning." I dropped the flashlight. The room went dark again, the glow of the TV the only light left. And in that static shimmer, I saw a live feed. My own apartment. From above. The image on the TV wasn't static anymore. It was moving, a live feed of my living room from somewhere high up, maybe from the vent or ceiling corner. I could see myself standing in the center of the frame, staring at the screen in shock. The camera angle shifted slightly, like someone adjusting focus. My chest locked tight. If this was a broadcast, someone had control of it, right now. I grabbed the router, ripped the cords out, and killed the power to every outlet. The screen went black. But a second later, it blinked back to life. The feed didn't stop. I stumbled backward, pulse hammering. That meant it wasn't connected through my Wi-Fi. It was transmitting somewhere else, maybe through mobile data, maybe directly to a hidden network. I turned the tablet back on, scanning through its system info. Under connections, a location flashed briefly before vanishing. I caught the first part of the address, a warehouse district 2 miles away. I knew that area, half abandoned, mostly storage spaces, some still active. My gut twisted at the thought. Whoever was doing this wasn't hiding far. I should have called the police. Any sane person would have. But after weeks of being ignored, brushed off, and doubted, I didn't trust anyone to get there fast enough. If I wanted answers, I'd have to go myself. I packed only what I needed: flashlight, the tablet, the memory cards, and the metal bar I'd used to jam the window shut. My phone was useless, I left it behind. Outside, the air was cold, still. Every noise, a passing car, a door slamming, made my skin crawl. I walked the 2 miles in silence, following the blinking pin on the tablet's map until the buildings turned from residential to industrial. And then I saw it, a single warehouse with lights still burning inside. A faint hum. A shadow crossing the window. Someone was waiting for me. The warehouse sat at the end of a row of crumbling buildings, half its windows boarded and the others covered in grime thick enough to turn the interior glow into a dull haze. The door wasn't locked. It swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty street. Inside, the air was stale, dust, oil, old metal. My footsteps bounced back off the high ceiling. Rows of abandoned shelving units stretched into darkness. The only light came from a set of monitors in the far corner, their blue glow pulsing faintly. I moved closer, gripping the metal bar tight. The hum I'd heard outside was louder now, an electrical buzz, the sound of machines breathing. When I reached the monitors, I stopped cold. There were 8 screens arranged in 2 rows. Each showed a different angle of my apartment. The kitchen, the bedroom, the hallway, even the inside of my fridge. All live. I could see the empty chair where I'd been sitting an hour ago, the front door still slightly ajar from when I left. My name flashed briefly in the corner of one screen, followed by a timestamp, the exact moment I'd walked out. He'd been watching in real time. On the table beneath the monitor sat a laptop. The webcam light was on, even though the lid was half closed. I flipped it open carefully. Lines of code scrolled by, streaming addresses, local camera feeds, timestamps, and one folder labeled Next. I clicked it open. There were new photos inside. Not of my apartment. Of me. Taken just minutes ago. One from the street, another from outside the warehouse door. The last one made my stomach twist. It was a close-up of my face, lit by the glow of the screens. The caption beneath it read, "Welcome home, Eli." The monitors flickered, and one by one, the camera feeds changed from my apartment to the warehouse itself. Different angles. Each one showing me, from above, from behind, from somewhere unseen. And then a voice echoed from the shadows behind me. "You finally made it." I spun around so fast the flashlight almost slipped from my hand. The beam caught a shape near the far end of the warehouse, tall, still, the edge of his hood faintly illuminated. He didn't move. Didn't speak again. Just watched. "Why me?" I demanded, voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "What do you want?" Silence. Then he stepped forward, slowly, until I could make out his face. Not the blank mask I'd imagined, not a stranger from a nightmare, an ordinary man. Average build, mid-30s, clean-shaven. That normality made it worse. He could have been anyone. "You were easy," he said finally. His tone was calm, conversational, routine, predictable. Same route to work, same diner, same night staring at a screen. "You never looked up." My throat went dry. "You've been following me for months." He shrugged, a slight tilt of the head. "Not just you. You're one of many. But you noticed first. That's what makes you interesting." He gestured toward the monitors, where my apartment still glowed across the screens. Most people never even see the cameras. They live their whole lives on display and don't ask who's watching. The words made my skin crawl. "So what is this?" "Some experiment." He smiled faintly. "You could call it that. Observation. Behavior. Fear. You learn a lot about people when you make them aware of how fragile their privacy really is." The flashlight flickered. I tightened my grip on the metal bar, trying to keep my hands from trembling. "You think this is a game?" He took another step forward, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of cigarette smoke. "Everything's a game," he whispered. "You just started playing back." Before I could react, every monitor in the room blinked off, total darkness. And in that split second before my eyes adjusted, I heard the faint click of a camera shutter right behind me. The click behind me snapped every nerve in my body awake. I swung the flashlight around, the beam cutting through the black, but it hit only rows of empty shells and drifting dust. The sound had come from close, too close, yet there was nothing there. I stepped backward toward the monitors, listening for any movement. The floor creaked under my boots, metal pipes groaned somewhere overhead, and then, another click, this time from my right. A camera again.